Welcome to Taboo Texarkana, the podcast where we dive deep into the untold stories, spiritual journeys, and topics people don't usually talk about. I'm Colton Volts, your host, inviting you to join me as we sit down with incredible individuals from Texarkana and beyond. And today, my guest is the local legend, Joseph Teel. He's a man of many episodes, many shows, many hats, many things. And I'm excited to jump into this conversation with you and get into your shows and just all that stuff. So welcome to the show. First off,
Yeah,
thank you
man.
for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Yeah, thank you for letting me come on the show, dude. This will be fun.
Yeah, first time you've ever done a
Yeah,
podcast.
this is it. This is the
Yeah.
first one. And local legend is great. That's
Yeah.
also
Yeah,
hilarious.
bro. Texarkana All-Star.
Yeah.
So tell me about what shows do you have going like right now? Like what's
All right. So my main two shows right now is the morning show that I do here for Texarkana. I just interview local people. Just anything I can do to highlight the community, highlight people that's got good stuff going on. And anybody, tattoo artists, roofers, just
yeah,
anybody, finance people, real estate. I've done it all, man. Just musicians, artists,
business
whatever
owners
you can
like
think of. Yeah.
yeah,
And I've recently shortened those, and they've took off, so they do better now. Just
yeah.
had shout to Madeline Hack. She just came on, and that was my highest viewed episode. Had 11,000 views.
Word.
That was nice.
I met her today.
Oh, dude, good
Yeah.
people, good
Yeah.
people. Shout out to Madeline Hack.
Yeah.
I called her Madeline Hawk the first time I met her, and I was very embarrassed.
I didn't know how to say her last name, so I'm glad you went ahead and took that.
Oh yeah, I'll take the bullet there.
Yeah. So she works for Red River Credit Union.
Right.
She's like behind organizing this Texarkana All-Star game that we both got drafted
Oh yeah,
to the Teal team.
yeah. I keep telling everybody I'm going for 40.
Yeah.
I'm going for
I
40.
mean, we got some killers on our team, so I'm excited to see who's on that other team.
Oh yeah,
You know.
I'm gonna dunk on somebody. I
Yeah.
can't dunk.
So tell me about your other show.
Okay, so this is where it's different. It's a lot different. So for YouTube, after doing experimenting for 2 years very heavily, I decided that for me, the local thing isn't gonna work for me on YouTube, like at the level I want it to work.
Yeah.
So I was like, at some point, I've got to find what I'm into, right? And go take that to
Mhm.
YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. Just something that's more universal, something that can go, that has its audience outside here. Like, the local people, they're not wild about this, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But, and so I didn't even mean to, like, I promise I didn't even mean to get into this. It just, once I got fascinated again with the Bible, um, I couldn't stop. It just, and every rabbit hole leads to another rabbit hole. And before long, I was like, man, I know a lot about this now. And I was like, well, this could be my lane. And I listen to a ton of stuff. So I'm on YouTube, I'm on Spotify, and I'm listening to an audiobook pretty much every point of the day.
Yeah.
Like, so I listen, I try to get information in like 5 or 6 hours a day, bro. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to learn. And so this is like the baby of all that. I was like, this is my way to be in my own lane and, finally kind of niche or niche down, however you're supposed to say that. And
Yeah.
that's what came from that. So it's the Agnostic Bible Study. It's basically just trying to approach the Bible from a neutral perspective.
Mhm.
So there's two main sides that you're going to see on the internet predominantly. You've got, like, a lot of times you've got like the atheists over here. They're not really going for it. And then you have the Christians side of the internet. And a lot of times they're just so focused on defending it, right?
Yeah.
And so you have attack and defense all the time. And so one day I was typing in, because people always ask me, they're like, what do you consider yourself? And I say, well, I think I'm kind of more agnostic about it than anything, basically just saying that, I'm not sure that we can know. So, like, if I think
Mhm.
about some of the most deepest things about life, you say, Joe, how do you know, like, that there is a God? It's like, I don't, maybe, hope, maybe so,
Yeah.
but maybe not. Like, maybe we can't know. And, even studying harder has kind of made me feel like, like, the more you study it, you think you're supposed to, like, get a better understanding. And then sometimes it leads to, like, it's just harder to know.
The more you know, maybe the less you actually realize that you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%, dude. Because, I was a youth pastor, right? And a lot of people
Oh.
don't know this about know this about me. But, and that was probably in around 2015, 2016. This has been a little bit. And, I thought at that moment I knew a lot about the Bible, and I would teach every Wednesday, I teach every Sunday. And, I really thought I knew, but no,
Yeah.
after this, and it's been about a year now, dude, of like um, unhealthy, like extensive research on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't know anything at all. I didn't know nothing. So
Yeah. Man, that's crazy. I could definitely see like I love the neutral aspect of like so many things in life instead of like attacking or defending because maybe people are like taking it personal instead of just stepping back and being like, what maybe there's more to this. Like there's always something to learn, and when
definitely.
you're on the defense, you're just like blinded. You're like, no, absolutely not. So with all this studying, has it made you more spiritual or more skeptical?
Mm,
Or both,
yeah,
really, like
I think I think ultimately it has made me a little bit more skeptical. Um, you know, after I left the church for a little bit, because that job kind of went away, and then I was like, then we were like, okay, well, should we find another church, or should we? And then we kind of struggled to do that, because I
mhm,
had put like all this time into this church. You're talking about like thousands of hours of free labor put into, I would do everything,
yeah,
I was there constantly, and it was a good place for me, until it wasn't, but. And so then there was this time where I didn't really think about it, and so once we didn't really find a church to like really settle into, I guess we stopped going quite so much. Then before long, it was like nothing.
yeah,
And I joined the military, and then you know how some of those environments are. You're not really thinking about all that.
yeah,
Come home, and it really was just like this. I almost call it like a revolution of learning in my mind, where I was about 27, 28 ish, and it all started with like a Neil deGrasse Tyson video on the moon. And I remember it, dude. I'm sitting in a ditch because I work outside.
yep,
I'm in a ditch and I'm listening to just, back then it was just like music and I was scrolling. And I found, it was just a reel. And it was a reel talking about the moon. And I just had this moment. I'll never forget this moment of like, huh, like, I don't know how the moon works.
yeah,
And it kind of set me off and like, dude, you don't know anything hardly, because I
yeah,
wasn't that great of a student. I was in trouble in school. I just barely passed. I think two of my classes I got like the 70 to get by,
mhm,
and I graduated, and it was like I didn't know I was going to graduate.
yeah,
And so I just had this moment of like, dude, if you don't start learning some stuff, like you're not ever going to know like anything about how the world works.
mhm.
And so that one video kind of set me off.
That's
And I was like,
crazy
yeah.
that one video can just like steer your curiosity, but like what a blessing too,
Yeah,
because like
for sure.
we're so unawake, sometimes maybe we're just
For
like
sure.
in the ditch, shoveling, working every day in and out, not even questioning. The moon is just the moon, like what a beautiful moment to like shit. How does the moon work? How galaxy, the stars, and like it just
Yeah, it was
opened
it
your
was a video,
consciousness.
and I can even remember it was a video about I can't even remember the word though. It's about why we see the sun, why we see the moon light up, and it reflecting off the sun. There
Yeah.
was some word that was like the percentage of light
Mm-hmm.
bouncing off the earth, and I was like, dude, I didn't know that. And then I got to looking at the moon, and I was like, phases and stuff like that, and I was like, okay, why does it look like this?
Yeah.
Why do we see the constellations and stuff like that? And then just before long, I'm like listening to history podcasts and just it would just kind of open the door. And I was like, well, let's go buy some audiobooks. And
Yeah.
before long, I'm like, oh heck, dude, like now every day, like it's a part of my routine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're gonna learn something.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people quit learning though. It's strange. Like I was a part of that where I was just like, I didn't really just learn ever.
Yeah. Yeah, we stop learning and just like consume and just live. I'm the same, man. I will listen to podcasts or books all day long and videos and inspirational things. And I'm really into ultra running right now, so it's all I've been listening to. So tell me about like you're a youth pastor. I'm assuming you're Christian. Your faith is Christianity,
Mhm.
and then you join the military and you slowly fade away from the church religion.
Right.
How how were you when you were out of the military? Like, when did you, like, lose your faith? Or, like, was there a moment when you were like, "I don't really, resonate with this
I kind of had like
anymore?"
some really dark moments
Oh,
like
shit.
afterwards where I kind of like was less convinced by everything. And then you do kind of have to go through all like the existential like thoughts about like, oh dang, like Like if some of these new conclusions I'm thinking about are right, then you have to deal with them. You know what I mean? Which a lot of people, sometimes people will get to those points and then they'll just say, well, all right, I'm going to watch TV and go to work and stuff and not think about them. But then like you do got to think like, and it also it's funny because it does kind of go back to the stars. Like you start thinking about like how big the universe is and like how small you are, and then like if the Earth is as old as they say it is, it's just like, well, damn, like what exactly does my life here matter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I went through a dark period where I kind of like my beliefs had shifted, and I didn't really know how to process it right. So that was tough.
Yeah.
But I do think I'm in a spot now where I feel like coming to grips with my conclusions a little bit better. And so, maybe, but being agnostic, I'm still on the fence about a lot of things, which keeps
Yeah.
me from just being like, everything is useless.
Yeah.
Everything is random. Nothing matters.
Those conclusions, do you feel more grounded in your conclusions because of your studying and your
Yeah, absolutely.
researching
Yeah.
specifically the Bible, or just everything,
Well,
consuming it
yeah,
all?
well, definitely the Bible because and I think a lot of people have a problem with what I'm doing, and then some people don't. It's a very tight line to walk. But here's the thing: the a lot of what I've come across that has shook my faith in the Bible doesn't necessarily eliminate Christianity, right?
Mhm.
It eliminates a certain form of Christianity that's really prevalent in like America,
Yeah.
right? And so I spent a lot of time looking at, the first 400 or 500 years of Christianity from Jesus dying somewhere between 30 and 33. Well, it's not even between, it's either 30 or 33 because of the how the moon would have landed on the specific Passover where Jesus would have died at. And then to like 400 or 500 AD. And so that's been a lot of where my studying has come from. And when you do that, you start to get a feel for what the original churches were like, and the different versions and the beefs and the things that were happening in there.
Yeah.
And then when you surround yourself with all the history, then you start looking at the early church fathers, like the guys that were like, the first ones to like ever write about it. And then the first, like I said, 300 to 500 years. And then you look at a church today and you go, well, that's kind of different.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so there's a form of Christianity that I feel like kind of my thought is a little dangerous to. And those people don't care for me. And that's fine, I understand. Like, I knew when I started this, like, once I got too far into it, I was like, once I decided I was going to speak on it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to piss people
I
off.
remember before you did it, you said something about like, I'll never talk about religion or politics
I did
on
not
my
mean to.
show or
I did
something.
not mean to.
And then
I promise I
sometime
didn't.
later you were like, I'm doing what I said I wasn't going to do.
Exactly. I don't know what
Hey man, like it's reaching people. I mean, you're doing it for a reason,
yeah.
the muse is like working through you to like put it out to the world. So like you're helping somebody, or you're provoking questions, and like people maybe it's helping other people come to grips with their faith on a deeper level,
Right. Yeah. So, like, one of the main things I want to be is a challenge, right? A challenge to, and not just to just Christianity, but a challenge to just people, and just the regular thought process. And I found that the question is the most important, just the most important thing that you could give somebody. And some people are uncomfortable with that, but some people thrive. And I'm starting to learn that, like, I really like to be in the middle of a question, a
Yeah.
one that is going to take me searching the answers, and maybe sometimes um, answers that I may not be able to find, and it's fun. And I think that I think this is why people become historians, right? This is why people become scholars of specific things, or academics, or whatever you think, because and especially something like history, it's not like a math equation, it's not like a science equation. These are things that happened or possibly happened, and what you're doing is taking little pieces of information, your sources, and you're trying to piece together the most likely thing. So a good historian is not always just trying to say, this is what happened in World War II at this moment.
Mhm.
They're saying, with the sources I have, they're weighing possibility, probability versus probability.
Yeah.
So, like, I could say, because of what happened at World War II and the sources we have, that Hitler did this on this day. And I'm going to say that that happened, or that I really feel like that happened, because there's a higher probability that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so then you take that same type of mindset and you take it and you try to put it back into the first century. We're talking 2,000 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so, here's one thing to think about. Nobody can tell you exactly what happened in 100 AD, in 33 AD. Nobody knows, right? All we can do is put our historian hat on, look at sources the best way possible, and try to come out with those outcomes where you say, I think, and like, I can't say conclusively, this is what happened. I don't have a time machine. I cannot go put my eyes on that. But I can say, based on everything I've looked at, this is where I've landed. And so a lot of my thoughts about the Bible are just that. I cannot go back in time. I can't do that. They always say if you could go back with somebody in the past and have them explain stuff to you, I would like to. I would go back and talk to like the real historic Jesus, because
Yeah.
I don't deny like there was a Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, I believe there was a Jesus. I believe he was a man. I believe he was from Galilee, and I believe that he was crucified by the Romans. And it's just what's after that is up for debate, like whether he rose again, whether he is actually like divine and all the things. But I believe that was a Jesus. So like if you could go back, I would love to do that. And then I would also like to see the pyramids, because what the what
Yeah.
was going on there, dude?
So have you gotten into man, I have another question I want to ask, but talking about the pyramids, have you gotten into like Enoch and like the Nephilim and
Yeah,
stuff
definitely.
like that?
Definitely. It's interesting. Those books don't make it in the Bible in the canon. Those are what we call apocrypha, and it seems like even Enoch is quoted in the book of Jude, which makes it into the New Testament, right? And so it's probable. Okay, so this takes a lot. So you got to think, if you're walking around in what we would call the New Testament era, like when the stuff happening in the New Testament was happening, there was no New Testament, right? So if you're walking around with Jesus, there was no New Testament, right? This stuff wasn't written yet. So like the Gospels are written about Jesus, but they're a little bit later. So Jesus dies somewhere around 33, and then the first gospel was likely Mark, written somewhere between 65 and 70. So you've got like a little 30-year gap. And then you have Matthew and Luke and John, and they kind of have their ranges. John seems to sit probably further back, closer to 100. And so that's a little bit of a gap. And then you think about Paul. Paul probably wrote somewhere between like the 50s and 60s. So I say all that to say there was no New Testament at this time. And so when they're talking about the scriptures in the New Testament, when they're referring to the holy scriptures and stuff like that, they're talking about what you would consider the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And so in their version of the Old Testament, it's likely that they knew books like Enoch, right? First and second
Enoch
Enoch.
in the Old Testament?
Well, it doesn't make it into the
But
canon.
It was
It could be considered a sacred writing that they would have.
whoa.
Yeah. So, and Enoch kind of expands from a story that happens in Genesis 6, where the angels basically mate with the humans
Mm-hmm.
and make what they call the Nephilim, the giants. And it's interesting. It's an interesting story. But like, you'll get into some like the conspiracy guys, and they'll say like, like there's all the conspiracies about giant bones and stuff like that they found. And if you believe in the Bible, like there's people, and there's like two versions of believing in some of the Old Testament stuff. There's like literalists that believe
Mhm.
like everything that happened in the Old Testament happened like exactly right. Like Noah's Ark was a real deal. Jonah and the fish, Genesis creation story happened exactly that way, or giants and stuff like that. And then there's other people that take more like a more allegorical approach to it. So like those stories were written about Jerusalem, like about Israel's past, and those stories are meant to teach you a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously Christians and Jews find different meaning when they look back at the Old Testament. So what was the question? The question was about Enoch.
About the pyramids and Enoch, and if you had like dove into it.
Yeah,
and-
yeah. So giants. So basically, what I'm saying is that if you believe in the Bible literally, then you kind of almost have to believe in giants,
Yeah.
right?
That's crazy. It's the offspring of the angels that fell,
Yeah.
created these demigod type.
Yes,
Human
but by the time
giants?
we get to Christianity, though, none of that really makes it into the cut. That's one
Yeah.
one quote from Enoch that makes it into one of the smallest books in the New Testament, Jude. Nobody
Mhm.
ever reads Jude. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Stuff like the pyramids. It's like those. This is another aspect of why the Bible is a little hard to like Old Testament history, and doesn't necessarily. Somebody's gonna disagree here. That's fine. You got to realize that everything I say, literally everything I say, somebody is gonna disagree with it. That's the nature of this.
Yeah.
But when we're looking at like ancient Samaria, ancient Egypt, stuff like this, like the timelines for those things are not necessarily lining up with what the Bible would say about like Genesis. So, like, we have Adam and Eve here, and then a lot of people have calculated to maybe like 6,000 years, right? They're 6,000 years old. And then we look at stuff like Samaria and Egypt, which are at least, 5 or 6,000 years, and they're functioning societies, right?
At that time.
At that time,
Yeah.
yes. And so it's just like the dating, like people try to get the dating of like when the flood was, if there was a Noah's Ark, and it's somewhere like 4,500 years ago. But they also date the pyramids to 4,500 years ago. So it's like, was it a flood? Was it during the pyramids being built, or like what? And then you have other tablets and stuff that are tough to deal with, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? It's I think they found it on like a Sumerian tablet, and it's probably dated to about 1,000 years before Noah's Ark. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a guy gets on a boat with his family to survive the destruction of a angry god, and the family survives, and they park the boat on a mountain top. And when they get close to the mountain, they send a dove out.
Sounds like Noah. But it's in the Sumerian tablets.
Yeah, and they're more than likely written before. So a lot of ancient societies have flood stories. So it's interesting. Like if you look at like some of the scientists out there, they believe that there was something called the Younger Dryas that was like maybe 11,000 years ago, something like that. Yeah, where there was like this big apocalyptic moment, basically, where there was just a cataclysmic event, basically, whether it was an asteroid or something of that nature, where water levels could have rose, and it's pretty extensive.
Yeah.
And so you have stuff like that seems to be dated further back than Noah's Ark, and then you have civilizations that seem to be like really old. And then like, what do you do with like the Neanderthals and the
pre-humans that were
and
evolving,
and dinosaurs, and
that are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years old.
Yeah. And so like you'll go on like Answers on Genesis. It's like it's a fun YouTube channel. Like I say it's a fun YouTube channel because it's like, and they have everything from dinosaurs were on Noah's Ark and everything. Whoa. It's like these guys are dedicated to like making Noah's Ark a real thing. Here's the thing. Noah's Ark could just be an allegorical story, and it could be, written from, it was meant to tell you that story. Yeah. Like, even if there's no telling if the actual writer of, like, they don't even know who did. They think, like, tradition says Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But like, the more people study into it, it seems like there's probably not Moses.
There's so much mystery there. But so it wasn't the story or the theory was that God flooded the earth to get rid of the Nephilim, like the
possibly. But what he says in Genesis is that he was basically just tired of the humans.
Yeah, and how they were acting, and
so which is another whole thing to grapple about. Like, this God, is saying, I'm done with everybody. And like, that doesn't bother us quite so bad because we're not the everybody.
Yeah.
Here's something interesting to think about when we think about Noah's Ark. I go on about Noah's Ark, but is that Genesis never calls Noah a preacher, right? So in the story of Genesis, God tells Noah to build a boat. He builds a boat, takes his family, and the rest of the world gets wiped out. Nobody mocks him. Nobody does that. Those are later ideas. And those later ideas do eventually make it into like 1 Peter, maybe 1 or 2 Peter, which is in the New Testament. But you got to think, those are Christians now, because there is a difference, because when there was the Old Testament, people weren't Christians yet. This was pre-Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the Old Testament is written to try to describe the time before Jesus. And then there's a 400-year gap where nothing happened. Well, stuff does happen. Those books just don't make it into what the Protestants, which the Protestants are just the people that aren't Catholics. It makes it into what you would consider your 66-book Bible. So things like the Maccabees and things like that those were written in that 400-year gap they don't make it into the New Testament. And then we start with the New Testament. Everything after that is what I would call Christian theology. So it's Christians now are forming their thoughts, and you start to see them rework the Old Testament and start using it to point it to Jesus. Now, it's complicated, right? Because, like in the book of Mark, the Agnostic Bible Study I'm doing, starts in Mark. And Mark, I think, is the first gospel that's written. And a gospel, like I said, there's 4 of them: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are the ones that are trying to tell the story of Jesus' life and ministry, right? But they only focus on the time that is his ministry. And then they get to what we call the Passion narrative. That's when stuff starts taking off, when they start heading to Jerusalem. And then Jesus is arrested, killed. And then there's resurrection appearances in Matthew, Luke, and John. It's interesting, at the end of Mark, a lot of people don't know this, but at the end of Mark, there's a bunch of verses that show Jesus being resurrected, but those aren't in the actual oldest manuscripts we have. Wow. So people think that those might actually be added. So the end of Mark, the first gospel written possibly, is just the ladies running away from the tomb because they find it empty and they just run off.
Yeah.
And I had a whole point about Mark. I'll get to rambling.
Is the oldest manuscript the Dead Sea Scrolls?
No.
Is
so
older?
Okay, so that's a good thing to talk about. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in a cave in Egypt, beside the Dead Sea, and it was really lucky that they were found. These are
crazy
super
story.
old,
Yeah.
and they actually don't do anything for the New Testament, really. So there's no New Testament writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were thinking it was written by like the Essenes. These were people that had removed themselves from society. They were like ascetics, basically, and they were super. Yeah, they thought, because there was these different sects of Jews at the time. You had your Pharisees, you hear about them a lot. Those are the guys that really cared about the law. And then you had your Sadducees. Those are the guys that were kind of like basically a different branch of the Pharisees, but they cared more about the temple and stuff that went on at the temple. And then you have the Essenes, and then you have what some people call the fourth philosophy. And those are the guys that had almost went like militant.
Yeah. So they were like Jew monks.
These guys were not happy that Rome had taken over.
Okay.
So that's another thing. It's so hard to like just start randomly breaking all this stuff down, but
it's so
much because Rome conquers. So Christianity can thank Rome for even being a thing. Christianity would not happen if Rome didn't conquer that whole area. There's no way. First of all, they have to kill Jesus. Second of all, they have to have this big empire that they've decided to let these people kind of be themselves inside of the empire as long as they play by Roman rules. And so like when Jesus is born, he's born under Herod the Great, according to Matthew and Luke. And so Herod the Great is like half Jew, basically. He comes from also some other folks, but they're going to let him be a client king. So he is ruling over Judea, which is the region where Jerusalem is and stuff. And Rome is just allowing him to be the king, right? Because at the end of the day, he still answers to Rome. So then if we zoom out and we look at all the Roman Empire at this time, it's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
And so this opens up the path for what they call things to be Hellenized, basically. So once everything starts getting more Greek, more Roman, things start to get what they call Hellenized, and people are starting to get more accustomed to Rome. So basically, the Jews were blending what they had with what Rome had.
They were Catholic? Or
what? No, so Catholic doesn't come till after Jesus.
Dang.
Yeah.
So what were the Romans? What was their beliefs?
Romans had their own state gods.
Oh.
Yeah, so, and this ends up becoming a problem for Christianity at first because, you got to think, everybody had gods, right? Everybody had gods.
Yeah.
Everywhere you went, they had gods. And even if you look in the Old Testament, it's so possible for me to not rabbit hole, I'm sorry. But if you look at the Old Testament at the beginning is not really all that like monotheistic. So when we think about the Bible, we typically think, okay, there's one God, no other gods exist, right? What happens is that's kind of a later thing that kind of that gets worked in, right? By the time Christianity happens, yes, the belief is that there is just one God and all the other gods are fake. But in the beginning, it seems like every region had gods, right? And at times, like they would get in trouble all the time for worshiping Baal. Like if you go read the Old Testament, the Israelites are in trouble for worshiping Baal like all the time. Like every once in a while, they would just stop worshiping God and they would just start worshiping Baal. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, why are we doing that? But like it, and so to go back and think that like to them at that time, Baal wasn't real or like a rival god, it takes some mental gymnastics, I think.
Man.
So really what the Old Testament is more of what they call henotheistic, which means that they land on this belief that there is other gods, but there is one God that we respect really, and that's our God. So by the thing is though, what makes this hard to make that statement and why I'm going to get a bunch of pushback is because by around the 500s BC, so 500-ish years before Jesus, there's a reform that happens. And it's after, so first Israel's conquered by Babylon, right? And they destroyed the first temple. Then Persia starts to take Babylon, which opens up Israel to get some of their land back. And then when they go back, they build this new temple, which is the second temple. And they start to reform things. And in this time period is a lot of where they start coming up with, under like King Josiah and King Hezekiah, they start coming up with like strict monotheism. Like there's other gods out there, but those are not real. Those are fake. But they definitely, in the oldest parts and the earliest parts of the Old Testament, like these other gods were real. You think, there's a story where Elijah, I believe, is going up against the prophets of Baal. There's like 450 prophets of Baal, and it's just Elijah. So a lot of people think about that story and they go like, God, it's awesome because Elijah wins.
Yeah.
But they don't think about the context there. 450 prophets for this other dude. Not dude, but God.
God.
You know what I mean? And
That's
so
crazy.
like to say Baal is fake, sure.
But
But
what are
like
these prophets?
But it's so
Like,
far, yeah.
What are they
He-
saying?
He also had his prophets, yeah. And so in the story, which is written in the Old Testament, which would need the Old Testament guy to win, you know, he wins. Like they throw water on the, like Elijah's so confident they throw water on it. And he's just like, hey, douse it again, hit it again, you know, and it still like bursts into flames. And so he wins. But just the thought of like, there's 450 prophets for Baal. It's like,
Just for one God.
Yeah.
Other God. So how do they hone it in and say like, okay, these other gods are real, but this one is the almighty, all powerful? Like how do
What-
they come to that conclusion?
I think it happens over time. And I
Yeah.
think it happens as their theology develops, their beliefs about God develop.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't want to think about, I don't know, man. I think because like what I'd had, like if I go back to youth pastor time, I was trained that the Bible was one unit, right? And like instead of it being like 66 distinct books that were written and compiled,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's called univocality or whatever is the fancy word for it, where they, you know, the Bible is 100% consistent. It's all telling you the same story. You just got to stick with it. It's telling you the right deal, right?
Mhm.
But when you really look into it, you can see phases, right, of how stuff develops. And you can see it in
Okay.
the Bible.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know, if the Bible is 100% perfect, then I can see the phases develop in that 100% perfect Bible, right?
Mhm.
So by the standard of their belief, you can see progression. Things like Satan in the first, one of the first times you see Satan is on a council with God in Job,
Whoa.
right? So they're sitting around this divine council, and basically Satan is like, hey, let's go mess with Job, and he won't
He'll
keep
crack,
liking you,
right?
right?
Yeah.
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 And so the story goes like Job loses everything, but doesn't give up on God. And it's a
Yeah.
cool story. It's good, you know, I personally believe that's allegory, but you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
I've listened to it once and it's pretty wild.
Mm.
What he's like, I'm gonna give them to you, Satan, and let you do whatever you want.
Which
to
is
him.
crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so also, you know, so when we read Satan in the New Testament, like over time, like there was a divine council and there were other gods on the divine council and Satan was on the council. And then later on we see Satan as Satan also can be called as like a person. Like you could be a
Mhm.
Satan. You could be, it just means accuser, tempter.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, but by time we get to the New Testament, there is what I call character development. And Satan is the red guy with the pointy hat. I mean, not the pointy hat, but the horns,
the horns
and the pitchfork,
Yeah.
and he's ready to send you to hell.
character development.
Character
I like
development.
that.
And it's, I mean, there's lots of things like that where when we look, like, was everything monotheistic? It was probably polytheistic at first, henotheistic, and then strict monotheism. Satan was on the council. Then he was just an accuser. Then he's a cosmic adversary to God.
Wow.
So, but what happens is why this stuff sounds so crazy when we get into it is that people have equated new standards of like truth and stuff, and we're putting today's modern view like we're reading the Bible like it's journalism, like it's coming from Time magazine, even though nobody trusts Time magazine anymore. I'm just
Mhm.
saying, like people used to trust journalism, like you know what I'm saying. We're comparing it to people. We're thinking that we're getting sources and things of this nature, and it's like these are ancient guys writing.
Yeah, for the time that they were in,
Exactly.
we can't put today's standards and logic on like yesterday's ancient past. I've heard Joe Rogan say that like several times,
Yeah, it's interesting. So like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, people will get like because I'll see like people will say, well, those are Greco-Roman biographies. And that sounds nice, right? Until you realize that Greco-Roman biographies mean that you can embellish things, add stories, put myths and legends in, and you can do whatever you want to add to the story to make it better. We
Yeah.
see that in the 12 Caesars. It's one from around that time. It's a Greco-Roman biography where, it just shows like supernatural things happening to the Caesars because they believed a lot of these guys that were the emperors, like they were getting God status, dude.
Yeah.
They were being considered God status. And so you get writings like that from historians
Crazy.
where they're not afraid to embellish.
Yeah.
And so like then we go and it's more of a more modern thing. It's more of like a 1800 1900 modern thing where people take the idea that the gospels are like a biography in the sense of like what me and you would think a biography is. So like if I wrote a biography about me, you would think that it's at least going to be pretty close.
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
But like that's just not the rules. These guys didn't have to. They didn't have the rules. They didn't have modern scholarship.
Mm.
There was like 5% literacy rate when this stuff was written.
Yeah.
I mean, they were doing the best they could. And there's also debates about who wrote them all. Like I could give you the whole spiel on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
It's a whole deal.
That's why I have such a hard time like believing in anything like 100% because like you said, like we don't trust Time magazine today. And I believe corruption has been around since the beginning of time and manipulation and things and like they can embellish and like kings can take certain things out of the Bible and it's like I just
I
with
will say,
how exposed the world
yeah,
is, it's really hard for me to like look back and like read something or even like the sources that you're finding. It's like it's just so hard to be like who wrote that and is it even true?
right.
Like
I will say this though. Here's one thing we can kind of sort of debunk: the King James thing. I see it on the internet all the time. King James edited the Bible. Here's the thing. So, King James Version was one of the earliest English translations, right? It's kind of more of a Shakespearean style
mhm,
translation. There's an older one that's English. It's the Geneva Bible, and it's older. But the thing about it is that because of discoveries and stuff they found, we have manuscripts that go back 300 or 400 to like 300 or 400 BC, right? So, what that means is that's a good thing.
mhm,
That means because if you do look at translation errors and stuff in the King James Bible, they're there, right?
mhm,
There's added line. He added one line about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's another thing about like King James didn't do this. Like he had,
other
yeah,
his
he had
people,
scribes do
yeah,
it. He had like 50 of them, I think.
yeah,
It's like 1611 or something like that. But there's nothing he could do to change those manuscripts that came from different places that are 1700 years old to us now.
that makes sense. The more manuscripts that you
Right. And
have,
so
the more you can like compare them to each
exactly,
other.
exactly. And that's why we have updated versions of our Bible, right? Because as more discoveries are found, we go back and we're able to find older documents and older manuscripts, and they do what's called textual criticism, which is basically putting manuscripts beside each other
Yeah.
and doing the studying part of
And
it.
is most of this coming from the same region and around the same time? Because like I could see if it was multiple places, it would be harder to deny. These people 1,000 miles over here wrote the
Right,
same
well,
thing
the
over
Roman
here.
that's another thing. The Roman Empire was so big, it kind of assured that
Mm,
people in different areas were having different manuscripts. And the thing is that they were close. So that's another thing to think about is like textual variants, right? This is when you have a manuscript from let's say Codex Sinaiticus, right, is probably in the 300, dated back to like the 300s, which is, that's far.
That's
That's so far. And this is around the time where Rome basically made Christianity its deal. You got to think Christianity struggled for the first 200 or 300 years, right? And then one day Constantine is on in a battle and sees a cross in the sky and wins a battle, and he's like, "Yo, this is what we're doing."
yeah.
And so then he starts to make the first steps into making Rome a Christian nation. They go through all these different councils, they make all these decisions. The thing is like you're saying though, since it is so spread out, it's a double-edged sword. We do have manuscripts, and they aren't all just from one place. The problem is we have a bunch of manuscripts that say different things because they're from spread out places.
Yeah.
And so what they have to do is and that's what it's like a lot of Christians, they don't really like the biblical scholars. These are guys that don't necessarily believe, but they spend all their time studying it. But like these a lot of times these are the guys reading all these manuscripts and comparing. And then there's Christian guys that do this too as well. But
it's good that they're agnostic or neutral, because then they're unbiased.
That's the hope.
Unless they're trying to
That's the hope.
disprove it.
But everybody's biased, so it never works.
Yeah.
That's another part of this. It's just like that's number one rule of historian is like judge the source.
Yeah.
Every time you read a source. So like people tell me like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, like, or like the Bible is like 100% perfect. And it's like, okay. So in every other source in my life, I'm supposed to judge the writers and find their biases. But in this one, it's off limits. It's like, no.
Yeah,
them
they're still
dudes-
humans
Yeah, still humans.
writing it.
So, like I was saying, there's textual variants, but a lot of them are similar. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, like we were talking about earlier, they find those. Those have some Old Testament writings in them and some other stuff. And nothing New Testament, nothing about Jesus. This is kind of almost contemporary when Jesus was actually alive and a little bit after. And so those do show us some crazy things, like how well Isaiah was preserved. So like Isaiah specifically. Wesley Huff went on Joe Rogan and got in trouble for saying a line wrong. He said that the great Isaiah scroll was word for word the same.
That's what I heard.
But it's not.
Verbatim.
Yeah, it's not. So
Okay.
that was a big drama about that. Wesley got in trouble. He apologized, all that stuff.
Well, Joe
basically
still repeats it. I've heard him say it a couple
I
times.
know. That's the problem of Joe Rogan, though. Joe Rogan's going
He
to
don't
hear
give a
something.
shit.
He'll tell somebody the same wrong thing for 3 years.
Yeah.
But it's cool. Wesley Huff is a good dude, and he's very smart, and that's and he's what we call an apologist, right? So his whole job in life is to defend the Bible, right? And so the problem I have with that is that I just feel like once you get into apologetics too hard, your main focus is then defending, and then I do think you have to skip over things. Like, so it's like, okay, we can shout out things that affirm us, and we can shut down things that don't help us. And, and it can happen on the other side because, like I said, biases can happen. So if you have this guy that's claiming to be agnostic but doesn't have a real agnostic agenda, and he really just wants the Bible to be wrong no matter what, then it can be the same thing. So that's really the heart of my show. So like in every episode, I do try to present both sides. So what I'm doing is working through Mark verse by verse. I'm gonna read every single verse in Mark. The cool thing about Mark is that it's paired together with Matthew and Luke. And a lot of like common people that aren't really looking into this, they don't catch this. But they're called the synoptic gospels, which means seen together. Because 90% of Mark is in Matthew, and 60 to 70% of Mark is in Luke. And so what a lot of people think, and this is like, it's not always word for word, but they follow the structure pretty closely. There is giant chunks of word for word. The Greek is close a lot.
That's cool.
And Mark is always the shorter one, of almost every time there's a story that's repeated. Mark is almost always the shortest one, and for that they call it something a lot of people believe. I personally really do believe this. It's called Markan priority, which means I've mentioned it a bunch, but I think Mark wrote first, and I think that Matthew and Luke had Mark as a source, and so that is one way to determine, to describe all the overlap. I could pull out a Bible right now, and I could really show you.
Yeah.
There's overlap, dude. It's like.
That's interesting.
If not, it's divine inspiration, and that's the other deal. I would so like I said on my show, I give everybody the same deal, right? I give you the rub. So I think there's a literary way to describe how these three specific gospels are connected. The other deal is divine inspiration. God inspired them to write the exact right things, and that they're written by eyewitnesses. And I will share that view. I don't agree with that view, but I will share it. A lot of times, there's so many things to think about. First of all, divine inspiration. If there's divine inspiration, that helps us describe why things are so similar. What that doesn't help me describe is why in those similarities, there is also differences, right? It's straight up in different lines, in the same story in one gospel, in the same story in another gospel, Jesus will say different things. In that moment, what did he say?
Yeah.
Like, if I really want to know what Jesus says, if he says, when the rich young ruler, it's a story, he walks up and the rich young ruler actually says something different to him. And then he answers differently in Mark and in Matthew. So, like, in that story, what did the rich young ruler say? I don't know. Depends if you're reading Mark. And how did Jesus answer? Well, it depends if you're reading Mark. And then he says, they both say something slightly different with a little bit of a different meaning. So it's like, okay, if it's divinely inspired, it explains the similarities, but it doesn't explain the differences, the small differences.
Is the differences just because it's being filtered through their own psyche and their own perspectives and their own life experience?
Possibly. But then it's like, so then how does divine inspiration work? Like, is God giving you what to say, or is God giving you the idea and then you try to flesh it out, and then you mess it up by saying your own human deal? And so then I'm like, but that is a deal. And
so interesting.
And then on the I testimony part, right? So then we got to think about it. So we'll think about somebody like Matthew, right? Traditionally, Matthew is thought to have been the disciple Matthew, and he wrote the Gospel of Matthew. Now, there's a ton of challenges to this. But for pretend, we'll play along and we'll go along with tradition. Matthew was a disciple, right? He doesn't get picked up in his own gospel. So if you look at the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew shows up himself. He never calls it Matthew. He never says, I, Matthew, are writing this. And when he in the story about Matthew, he doesn't say, this is when they walked up on me. Yeah. It just says they approached the tax collector, Matthew, right? So there's no reason for us to, but even if we're still playing along, he's brought in chapter 9, right? So if Matthew is the eyewitness, who eyewitnessed 1 through 8? Who eyewitnessed the birth narrative, right? So we get in Matthew, we get this birth narrative that doesn't really line up with Luke. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But we get the birth narrative. Where does Matthew get that story? In the birth narrative in Matthew, King Herod, who dies in 4 BC, pretty much very shortly after Jesus is born, he has a secret meeting in his council that's recorded. And who was the eyewitness of this secret meeting? Who could have that? Then we get John the Baptist, right? So we get this first story. This is the first story of Jesus' adult ministry. All of them start with John appeared in the wilderness, baptizing people in the Jordan River. Yeah. And then in those days, Jesus walks up and gets baptized. The sky opens up, the Spirit descending like a dove, a voice from heaven cries out. It's this big, crazy spectacle. And you go, man, that's crazy. And then in Luke and Matthew, they make the scene even bigger. John's got all these lines and he's got all these quotes. And then you say, well, wait a minute. If Matthew was a disciple and John was a disciple, who eyewitnessed this?
Yeah.
Because Jesus gets baptized in Judea and then goes back up to Galilee, a whole different region, and then picks his disciples.
That's crazy.
So is it just, did Jesus tell them the story? Sure, maybe.
Yeah.
But like, is that eyewitness testimony if you tell a story about yourself? That's not how people get. So like when people say eyewitness testimony, I say how there's a story. Jesus is praying in the garden. He's praying, right? The whole point of the story is that the disciples fell asleep. They are asleep when Jesus gets arrested. And yet we have the word for word verbatim prayer that Jesus prayed as the disciples fell asleep.
Yeah, how does that make sense?
Yes. In there, there's a secret meeting about how to arrest Jesus before they get him. Who was at the secret meeting? That was the meeting of the ops. That was the bad guys.
Yeah.
Who was in that meeting? It wasn't Judas, because Judas was already back. Judas was with the boys because he had already turned Jesus over secretly.
Sounds like, script, like they're filling in like these important things that happened. How do they even know it happened?
Well, well, the Gospels are written in something called, like, if you look at the literary style, it's called omniscient narration. It happens in books. It happens in stuff we read all the time, right? It's when you can tell when um, the reader will tell you the thoughts or the dreams of a person. We get the dream of Pilate's wife. Who eyewitnessed Pilate's wife's dream? Nobody. Nobody did, right? The inner working, when Pilate's arrested, the disciples have fled. I mean, when Jesus is arrested and took before Pilate, they've all fled.
Weird.
Who is
Yeah.
witnessing this? And so there's crowds there, right? But then we also get like random experiences where people bump into Jesus and then they're like, and the woman thought this or she felt this. It's like, that's not eyewitness. Now, I'm not saying those things didn't happen. That's not what I said.
Yeah.
I'm just saying if we're looking at divine inspiration and eyewitness testimony, we get into situations where divine inspiration, it's right sometimes, but then it's still wrong sometimes. So I get confused on how that would work. And then I also have the moments where there was no eyewitness there, or they record something that could not have been
Yeah.
eyewitness. So the morning of the resurrection, you lay out all the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When they come up to the tomb, they find the tomb in four different ways, right? Depending on which one you read. Sometimes there's an angel there. Sometimes Sometimes it's already rolled over. Sometimes there's a gardener there one time. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
like in those moments, like what's happening there? The two thieves on the cross get a different story. Like in one story, in one gospel, they both mock Jesus. In another one of them classically repents, and
Mhm.
Jesus tells him, "Right now, you're going to heaven." Like straight up.
Have you had somebody on your show or planned to like debate and ask them these
Oh yeah,
questions?
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Cole, Dr. Cole. That's my dog.
He's been on the show already?
Yeah, he's got his doctorate in apologetics.
Oh, snap.
We've talked for 6 hours now. Yeah. So
Nice.
I mean, he gives me the pushback that I expect.
Yeah.
But
Valid questions, like I'd be interested to.
And
'Cause I
so
don't know.
that's another cool thing about the Agnostic Bible Study now. If you want to go to the page and see me and Cole's initial deal, that one was less of a debate because I didn't know anything at that point. I was just
Yeah.
getting interested in everything and I had a bunch of questions to ask him. But the second one is this stuff, and it's heavy.
Yeah.
And we had decided beforehand, perfectly fine with disagreeing, and
Yeah.
to just send it. So we sent it. And
Yeah.
so what I'm doing, because I want to keep my episode short, I'm breaking that down into sections.
Yeah.
And so, and then even doing reflection episodes. So my episode coming Thursday is actually a reflection to a disagreement me and him had. So,
Nice.
extensively, I'm looking into it, and so like I said, everything I've said today here, it's going to be debated. There's some sect of the internet that disagrees with me. There's, what I've tried to give you is at least what the scholarly consensus is for a lot of this stuff. So like the overwhelming amount of scholars agree with a lot of what I said. I've took some liberties, but you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to approach it as truthfully as possible. My goal is not
Yeah.
to like take out the Bible.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you're coming from
No.
an
I'm
evil
interested because I
place.
want to know what Jesus actually said. So like
Yeah.
it just depends on your level of like how much do you really want to know? Because in scholarship there's this idea of the historical Jesus. And that's when scholars sit down, whether Christian scholars or atheist scholars or whatever, agnostic, whatever, they sit down and they try to determine from from a history standpoint, what can we know about for sure or highest probability
Mhm.
of like the things that Jesus said. So things like Jesus' baptism. A lot of people think Jesus really did get baptized by John because it is kind of interesting that would happen, right? Because here you have sinless Jesus that walks up to a guy. In every other situation, the person is an authority that's doing the baptism. So Jesus walks up to get baptized by another guy. It specifically said that John the Baptist has drawn this humongous crowd, and he's baptizing. The reason for is a baptism of repentance
Mhm.
for the forgiveness of sins. So a baptism to say sorry for the things you've done wrong and be forgiven. And Jesus shows up and gets in line, right? And so a lot of people think that actually did happen because that's kind of a more stranger one to explain later, like maybe not something that you would just come up with, right? It's
Yeah.
called the criterion of embarrassment. Like, not that that's necessarily embarrassing, but you see the difference between Mark. Mark was probably written first, and it just says Jesus shows up, Jesus gets baptized. Matthew adds in which Matthew possibly was looking at Mark, Matthew slides in this line where John is like, oh, I don't need to baptize you. You need to baptize me, right?
Yeah.
And so did Matthew just have an extra source? Did John really say that? I don't know. It's hard to tell, but it can look like Matthew is sometimes softening some of these things.
Yeah.
And so, he tells John the Baptist, no, I consent to being baptized. It's for all righteousness. He gives us reason, And then in Luke, it doesn't actually show the scene of Jesus being baptized. And then John, that's written last, it actually doesn't show Jesus' baptism at all. So I think the baptism of Jesus actually happened historically because it's harder to explain. Something like Jesus being born in Nazareth, that's another thing. Nazareth is just wasteland, right, dude? Like, not wasteland, it's just like a tiny, tiny village, right, with no significance, right? And now we have this great Messiah figure from the line of David supposed to come. And so a lot of people think that he kind of more than likely was, because why Nazareth? Why would you make that up? And interesting enough, I know I'm running out of time, but interesting enough, when there is birth narratives, because you got to think, and one of my favorite things about Mark is that it doesn't have a birth narrative, which is very interesting. So in the earliest gospel written possibly, it just starts as Jesus as an adult. And so to Mark, or the writer of Mark, that is where the story of Jesus really takes off. But to Matthew and Luke, they start Jesus off from the beginning.
Yeah.
And in their story, they both find ways to put Jesus in Bethlehem, to be born in Bethlehem. Now, most historians think Jesus was born in Nazareth because he's Jesus of Nazareth. But those two stories, they both find a reason to put Jesus in Bethlehem. That makes a little bit more sense if you were trying to build a Messiah character, right? Because Jesus is supposed to be from the line of David. That is Bethlehem. That's the town, right? And so in Luke, they say that he has to go to a census. And census is full of problems. That's not historically what happened. More than likely, I have to say that, more than likely, historically, I don't think the census happened. I don't think Jesus, I personally think Jesus was born in Nazareth. He was Jesus of Nazareth, according to Mark, at least. And, but anyways, the story says Jesus is born of a virgin in Bethlehem. In those two stories. Now, Luke and Matthew have that. Now, have you seen a nativity story, right?
Yeah.
What we have is a blended version of Matthew and Luke, right? Because the wise men and the shepherds, they never see each other. These are different events, right? And the star, that's just in Matthew. It gets really difficult.
So confusing.
It's very difficult. And so, Herod's trying to kill them. So so think about this. In Matthew, they leave because they get a dream that Jesus is about, that Herod is going to have all the kids 2 and under killed, right? Yeah. And so they send a dream and they leave. And then when they show up, they kill all the babies and Jesus isn't there. I just want to pause and say, I wish they would have gave everybody the dream. That would have been cool too. And maybe we just get all the babies out. But
that's pretty wild.
That's not my fight. I ain't got a dog in that fight. I'm just saying. But so they didn't tell nobody. They left all the rest of the babies there to get slaughtered. But anyways, then they go to Egypt. And then when they leave Egypt, they eventually go back to Nazareth. They don't want to go back to Bethlehem because Herod does die, but his son takes over. And his son, Archelaus, is equally evil. And so they know, they get another dream, says don't go back. There's another problem with that is because Luke says that when they leave Bethlehem, they go straight to Nazareth. And so in Luke, you have Nazareth, Bethlehem, Nazareth. In Matthew, the story starts in Bethlehem, they go to Egypt, and then they go to Nazareth. But the thing is that Luke gives us a strict timeline. He goes to the temple to do all the stuff that makes him Jewish, right? You have to go through the whole deal, and then they go back to Nazareth. And none of this is mentioned about him having to go to Egypt and fleeing. So those are two big differences there. And also the census is a train wreck. I can't get into. I don't have enough time. It'd take an hour. But it would take 15 minutes, but we don't have 15 minutes. But the census doesn't really make sense historically. So what it looks like to me is that they both tried to make a story that gets Jesus out of Nazareth and gets him into a better birthplace that lines up more with the Old Testament about where Jesus would come from.
They have those, 3 or 4 books that are all telling the same story.
Yeah, there's 4,
but they're
basically.
Different.
Yeah, there's 4 because John is also telling the gospel, But the crazy thing about John is it's so different. And that's why it's not considered the synoptic gospels. And so, but yeah, it's very nuts. And people, it takes studying. I get down with 3 Bibles and I lay them beside each other and I go back and forth. And I'm in episode 11 going through Mark, and every single story in Mark has had a counterpart in Matthew and Luke so far. Yeah. And right now, where I'm at, the structure has been exactly the same. There's been additions to the stories in Matthew and Luke. Those 2 typically add where Mark just gives you the bare bones. But so I just want to say this. That's why I feel like there's some type of literary dependency. That's why I think Luke and Matthew looked at it, because if me and your homework looked this close, we wouldn't say that me and you both just got super lucky. Here's the thing, I know I'm running out of time and I get to
my homework, just make it a little bit different.
Yeah. And but the thing is, it's not just quotes that match. It's the sentence structure outside of quotes. That's nuts. So crazy. If I told you a story about how this podcast went, well, me and you might could come up with some same quotes. You possibly could quote something I said here today, and it could be close. But the chances of you getting the sentence structure outside of a quote, word for word the same as me, is just astronomically, doesn't feel like that can happen. And so that's why I start thinking of other ways. Maybe they just looked at the other, right? Because damn, that sure does seem like that makes a whole lot more sense. Yeah. And none of this means that it's wrong. None of this means that it's made up or fabricated or none of that stuff, which I've made some challenging claims. But the story of Jesus, Jesus really could have been a person. And for all I know, Jesus could have resurrected and Jesus could have done this. You could still be a Christian and believe everything that I think about the Bible. It is a challenge to... Basically, I'd say the version of Christianity that I was given my entire life. Yeah. And
it sounds like you're just trying to figure it out, and you're using the material and the sources that you have and you're questioning it,
Yep.
For better or for worse.
I get into rambles, I'm sorry, bro. But this is my, I don't know, bro. Every day I listen to hours and hours of...
Well, you're passionate about it. Tell the people where they can find your 2 shows.
Yeah, so for the morning show, it's lighthearted. It's nothing like anything I just did right there. It's fun, a lot of fun. That's on Facebook specifically. And then for the Agnostic Bible Study, if you want to really dive in, I'm probably even more neutral on the show than I was here today. Yeah. But I try to present both sides to everything. And if you really want to get without the I hate the Bible or the super church spin that happens, it all happens, Cool. And so I that is my attempt. I don't always do right, so
yeah. Well, man, I feel like we could go another couple hours, but we've hit our limit at the Texarkana podcast studio. Shout out to Anthony Vaughn.
Shout out to Anthony, brother.
He does all the work behind the scenes, makes it easy. Joe Teel's...
That's actually my dad. People don't know that.
What, Anthony?
Yeah, it's actually my father. That's my father.
Check out Joe Teel. I'll put all of his links and stuff in the show notes. He's 200 plus episodes in on all of his different shows. Follow him on Facebook, TikTok, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Agnostic Bible Studies on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
Episodes every Tuesday and every Thursday. Yeah. Tuesdays are verse breakdowns, and Thursdays are explainer stuffs or those parts of the stuff from Cole or reflections or something.
Nice. So, cool. And he also has a recording studio.
Yeah, I don't do nothing there, but that's all for me, brother. I don't share that. I don't share that no more.
I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, book studio time. No, don't.
Thanks,
book
y'all.
Studio time.
Thanks for tuning in.
Appreciate it.